level of conversation that I was able to have with many of you around the content of your learning that has resulted. So I just want you to know that for the most part, the last 3 days, I've been pretty selfish in my learning, I have to admit. I have been in a place where the way that I process things in the world is, at one point in time in my schooling career, I thought was a deficit more than a gift. And I still somewhat have to be honest and say that I am in a very vulnerable space, even standing here talking with you. My knees are shaking. And it's not because my knees aren't shaking because I'm not, I don't speak publicly, because for most of you, you know me, that's pretty much what I do. That's my real job. This is my joy. But I stand there because I was one of those students in school that was not a product of a mindful system. I was a product of a system that if I took a little bit longer to put the pictures in my head and see myself in my learning, I was slow. I couldn't keep up. Now, I'm not saying that I failed out of school. My parents were both educators. Mom, dad, aunts, uncles, you name it. It was in my lineage. I had no chance of being anything but a teacher. But I know that I struggled my way through school and have only learned that over the course of just completing a doctoral degree, my friend Brown said up there. I see someone from my doctoral program. I see many of you from some undergraduate work. I see many of you from national board certification and master teacher. And I want you to know that I have always felt that I am learning more alongside you than I ever did in school. And that saddens me. But what empowers me and makes me feel great about standing here and puts my anxiety at ease is knowing that while I was selfish in my learning here, I've learned over the last few years that there is power in sharing your learning with others. Because I keep hearing Dennis's words of, you've got to share it with others. It means nothing if you're not sharing it with others. And I hear Liz's story about how important it is that it isn't just about what's happening in your classroom, it's what's happening in the conversations outside as well. And so what I want to share with you here today isn't, okay, here's how I learned. But what I want to do is I want to leave this in your space. Because I argue with people that I'm not really a visual learner. I'm not. What I am is much more of a kinesthetic learner. And what I see myself doing is allowing you and leaving this with you. It's my hope that the learning can now be beyond just me, and it can be something that you take home with you. So consider it not my gift, but your gift. So I just kind of want to show you where my thinking is, and Dennis and Liz and I talked throughout the week of, would it be better to just kind of share what you're thinking at the end, or would it be better to share it little pieces at a time? We kind of came to the conclusion that now is story time. And here is the messiness of my thinking, but the power of the mess is what you learn in the process. I have an amazing friend, Julie Torres, who's not here today. And what I love about my friends that are in this work with me is that they leave me with things that challenge me. And she sent me a text yesterday. She's not able to be here today. And she said, you know, Taryl, the real learning happens in the trial and error of application, seldom in the input. And when I got it, I went, what is this? And I had to ruminate on it for days or for hours all last night. And what does that really mean? What I think it really means is that until you get messy and you get constructivist and you get, okay, who is that? Who am I? Who are these people around me? And what is the learning? That all of this input may mean this much to you, but it may mean a lot more than any of us will ever see. So if you don't mind indulging me in my messy thinking. So we started out the first day together with our friends Liz and Dennis. Liz and Dennis, who brought together a book, a really interesting, intricate, innovative idea of bringing a researcher with a teacher. What can a teacher's stories do to inform research, and what can research do to inform the stories in the classroom? And we started with these mindfulness assignments, and so I decided to put the mindfulness assignments down here with these little reflecting glasses, because that is a way for you to remember these were your conversations, these were your challenges presented. And we really just kind of started with, why are you here? What led you to become a teacher? What led you to come and be here today? And for the most part, this is the 6th annual Leadership Institute by the K-12 Center. And in the last 6 years, every year, what we do is we find that the Leadership Institute isn't necessarily a learning institute, it's an application institute. It's a reflection, it's an opportunity to create some space around thinking about self and thinking about work and thinking about the power of colleagues. So we began this kind of journey with the intent that, for those of you who were here last year, you saw that there was kind of a path that unfolded. And the path was learning about the first and the second and the third and the fourth way of teaching. But at the end, we ended it with this idea of a path unwritten. So I thought, okay, so this is going to be the year that we just unroll the path, and we're all going to leave with this glorified action plan of, this is what I'm going to do first, this is what I'm going to do next, and if I do all of these things, then imagine what reform could take place. And imagine if you bring 200 people into a room, imagine the change that we can make. So I thought in the beginning, not knowing where anything else was going, that I'm going to make this path, and this path is going to unfold beautifully, and by the time they leave, they're going to have an action plan ready to go and attack. Well, the change plan, or the plan changed. So as I started here thinking about, okay, what was that first way? You know, you do your thing, I'll do mine. What was that second way? What are the standardization and markets that led us to a test-driven and pencil examination type of way? Somebody else knowing better, the government, our school systems, our district leaders. The third way, we feel like we're trapped. We feel like there's a target on our back and we are chasing it. These 3 ways, in and of themselves, are not necessarily bad. We learned that there are pieces of these experiences that form us. When things happen the way that we don't want them to happen, if we don't learn to take with them what we've learned, then we just look back at the past and say, well, we'll never do that again. And wouldn't that be a shame if we couldn't take some of the amazing pieces of what we've learned through history along with us? So we talked about kind of the unholy trinity of what happens when teachers close their doors. What happens when teachers are so conservative that they play the safe route every single time because it's easier, because you can say, oh, that's done. We talked about what happens when we go back into our foxholes because we're so in the present moment that when pressures are put on the system, all we can think about is what was that short-term fix. And we find ourselves in this terrible kind of unhealthy cycle, and we find ourselves back in our foxholes instead of emerging from them. So as we moved down the path here, we started exploring, okay, so where is Arizona? Where in the fourth way are we? And then even more powerful, where do you want it to be? And the first time that Dennis did this a year ago, I thought, well, that seems weird. Isn't everybody just going to go to the fourth way? How many of you thought that? Like, well, isn't that what this is about? We're all supposed to go to the fourth way. Well, do you notice what's missing here? There isn't a fourth way. Because the fourth way is about how do we take this path and take our learning towards the fourth way. So this is where kind of the space in the center came from. It was this idea that if the fourth way is something that we're headed towards, I didn't want it to just be, okay, forget the first, second, and third way, and let's start focusing on the fourth way. Because I don't think that the fourth way is necessarily the answer either. I kind of thought the fourth way is a combination of all of these other ways. And what was most valuable about that exercise, when you saw where other people were, you turned and you talked to somebody who was like you. You turned and you talked to somebody who saw it another way. And what was more powerful in that? The choosing of the way or the dialogue that resulted as a result? And so when I got to the end of the road here, I remember Liz telling her story about being on Heartbreak Hill and how she got to the point where she was at the end of her rope. She was at a breaking point that the saddest thing that could possibly happen is that we lose a teacher like Liz in school systems. How many of you know teachers like that? They got to their breaking point and that was the end. And so as we stand here kind of at the end of this space, she started asking me questions like, where do you find your space? And I started thinking about how that space then becomes, what we are looking for is space. All they give us is contrived space. They say at the end of a staff meeting, okay, now take about 10 minutes and write in your journal what you're thinking. There's your space. All right, we'll see you next time. Or we contrive this space and we call them PLCs, or we call them data teams, or we call them these things that are not really space at all. All they are is gaps. And so when we get our rope and we think that there's no other choice